break, I felt the urge to delete my social media apps for a whole month. For the whole month of January, I didn't use any form of social media. And what I learned during this time is just how addicted I was to social media and how much I would rely on my phone to satisfy me more than God. And all this got me thinking, okay, what are the neurological impacts that social media has on us, and how does this affect our relationship with God? Well, through my research, I've discovered that social media does in fact have addictive qualities that affect our self-esteem, our mental health, and our memory and how we process information. But I've also studied how spirituality can scientifically reverse these negative effects of social media by practicing things like prayer and meditation, connecting with nature, and gratitude. All practices that I argue, if Christians participated in more than social media, could draw us nearer to the Father, connecting us back to the true source of life. So in this presentation today, I'm going to be discussing what those neurological effects of social media are, and then how Christians can use spiritual practices to break the idolization of technology. To start, my research found that social media is addictive. But what is addiction? So to be defined generally, it's a deep attachment to an experience that is harmful or difficult to do without. There's substance addiction, like alcohol or drugs, and then there's behavioral addictions as well. And social media and internet use would fall into behavioral addictions. And this is impacted by a few things, but our brain's chemicals has a huge thing a part of it. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that deals with pleasure. And a study looked at by Mark Ellingson in an article called Social Media and the Cost of Distraction, Neurobiological Perspectives on the Quality of Life, found that the internet addict has an increased release of dopamine, but becomes accustomed to it, and so then it craves even more. They also found that because of that, there was a loss of self-control within internet addicts and their excessive use of media. Also, according to a new study by Harvard University, self-disclosure on social networking sites lights up the same part of the brain that also ignites when we're using an addictive substance. The reward area in the brain and its chemical messenger pathways affect decisions and sensations. So this is the reward center in the brain. I had to write it down because I was like, that's hard to say. This is the nucleus accumbens, and so this is where our dopamine is. There's like 65% of the neurons in this part are where dopamine is, and so this is dopamine traveling to that reward center. So this is all being activated when we're using social media. And so this dopamine drive makes us think that we are receiving a positive reward when using social media, except the short-term satisfaction doesn't outweigh the long-term negative effects. So through this addiction, there's an effect on mental health and self-esteem. We are seeing a big increase in anxiety and depression among teens and adolescents because they're surrounded by technology that is inescapable. And within this social media world, people are being fed realities that may or may not be true and are relying on validation from an online world. In an article titled Social Media Addiction, Its Impact, Mediation, and Intervention, they found that social media users are frequently exposed to other selective and glorified online self-presentations, which can in turn reduce the viewer's self-esteem. The desire of affinity seeking and wanting to be liked by people online impacts our mental health, and it all comes full circle with addiction. Because in another study done by Dr. Soraya Medizadeh, she says it's also likely that people with low self-esteem will go online and be more eager to engage in online activities to raise their self-esteem. Because by doing so, it provides an outlet for the hoped-for possible self to be expressed. So essentially, this is all just creating an unhealthy cycle, something that looks like going on social media, seeing someone else's post, getting insecure, needing to validate yourself by posting. So then you wait for the likes, you wait for the comments, you get that dopamine rush, but then you see someone else's post again and they're prettier, they have more likes. So then you feel like you need to affirm yourself again by posting, and it creates this cycle. And that's shown to up anxiety and depression. And then in a study done to see the differences between those addicted to the internet and those with a low to moderate use, the study found that in the group consisting of people addicted to the internet, there were mental disorders that did not appear in the other groups, such as ADHD, depressive disorder, PTSD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or eating disorders. And in turn, mental disorders which did occur in other groups, such as anxiety disorders or psychoactive substances, were much more common in the group of patients addicted to the internet. While there is so much more I could talk about within those subjects, I'm going to shift to spirituality because it all connects. Spirituality is actually being studied by scientists because, weirdly enough, it's becoming secular. Even atheists are adapting spiritual practices outside of religion because there are real positive neurological and psychological effects. Now, I'm going to be talking about them in light of Christianity, but it is a really fascinating thing. The practices of prayer and meditation, connecting with nature, and practicing gratitude are all proven to reduce anxiety and depression, cultivate a better mindset of life, and actually change the plasticity of our brains. When looking at a study for meditation with those who are avid in the practice and those who are not, scientists found that there is more gray matter in the brain in those who practice meditation, and gray matter is associated with working memory and decision making. Meditation also has effects leading to decreases in oxygen consumption, respiration rate, and heart rate, which are all things associated with panic and anxiety. And then it's also shown that the love hormone oxytocin is shown to be active in those who participate in spirituality and meditation as well. Then we have connecting to the more than human world, which is what Dr. Sheldrick, author of Science and Spiritual Practices, like to put it, or connecting with nature. This is shown to make one have a more healthier and positive mindset on life. In a study comparing the brain activity of those who went on a walk in a leafy natural area compared to those who walked in the city, found that the natural setting had reduced the tendency of one to brood. And sure enough, the region of the brain most associated with brooding, the subgenual prefrontal cortex, was less active in those who had walked in a leafy natural setting than those who walked along busy roads. Essentially, to brood is to dwell on something negative. So those who walked in a natural setting were able to experience more joy and weren't inclined to think negatively. Then we have the power of gratitude. Those who practice gratitude are actually shown to experience positive emotions more often, enjoy greater satisfaction with life, have more hope, and experience less depression, anxiety, and envy. They also tend to score higher in pro-sociality and are more empathetic, forgiving, helpful, supportive, as well as less focused on materialistic pursuits compared to less grateful counterparts. And also, practicing gratitude can change the plasticity of your brain by training yourself to think more positively in life. That actually creates a habit of thinking positively that can continue on into the future, producing a healthy dopamine pattern. So, how can these practices draw us closer to God within the battle of social media addiction? Well, to view it from a theological perspective, based on the scientific ways social media affects us through addiction, I would argue that it's become an idol in our lives. And God calls us to have no other gods before Him. And when we are turning to social media to receive our identity, our validation, and our comfort, Houston, we have a problem. So, the first step is always repentance, giving back control to God, actually turning back to Him and away from the things that are grabbing a hold on us. Then what we need to do as Christians is to take these spiritual practices I just talked about and begin to incorporate them into our daily lives, replacing the habits of excessive social media use. Breaking the chains of an addiction like social media is hard because it's something we have access to 24/7 and you can't really escape it. But that's why I believe that rewiring our brains by partaking in these spiritual practices through a Christian light will begin to cause us to crave the life-giving nature of what God can do in us over social media's negative grasp. We will begin to see a shift in our mental, emotional, spiritual, even neurological health because it's scientifically proven, but also because we are giving back the control of our time to God, allowing Him to be our source of life, not our digital screens. So while social media and the internet has its good things, I'm not arguing against it totally, I do think we need to exercise self-control because it's biblical, but also so that we can avoid addiction, have more positive psychological and neurological effects, and a deeper, more connected spiritual life with God.